Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to High Botanist Tel'arn on Mythic in the Nighthold.
Yes, this fight is a little different from the heroic encounter, as it kind of plays out in reverse. You'll start off with all three bosses active, and they do not share a health pool, and once you kill off one of them, the remaining bosses will heal to full and have their abilities modified in some way. So this will leave you with an absolute ton of different orders that you can do the fight in. However, there are two main orders that are considered the best, and we'll be going over the one that we use and the majority of guilds use on their first kill. Now, the fact that the bosses do not share a health pool and that they will heal up to full once one of them dies, there is really no point in cleaving or multi-dotting them down unless it is a single target DPS increase. However, as the boss doesn't have a super tight damage requirement, it is still worth having some of your DPS, such as hunters, have a burst AoE build in mind. This is mainly to counter the lashes, because in the later phases you'll be dealing with more of them than you did on heroic. But either way, let's get straight into it and talk about phase 1.
So anyone that's been paying attention to the footage that's been playing in the background while Alex was doing the introduction, this phase is identical to phase 3 on heroic in every single way. So we're not going to sit here and talk about how everything works because, well, you've already seen it before. And instead, we're simply just going to tell you, kill Naturalist first. The modifications that he gains if he enters phase 2 or in phase 3 are problematic to say the least. So kill him off first, and then you'll transition into phase 2. In this phase, two abilities have been changed. When the plasma orbs die, they will now spawn 2 parasitic lashes. You want to kill these orbs in the exact same order that you have been on heroic. However, you need to be prepared to CC and kill off the lashes that spawn immediately afterwards. This isn't very difficult to do, you just need to be very careful with the orb that you have in melee, the one that you use to stack the bosses on top of and you just cleave it down, because the lashes that do spawn could then immediately jump onto the melee, and then you're going to have a load of problems. So melee just needs to make sure that they're 5 to 10 yards away from the orb when it does finally die. And for every single orb, it's important that you assign an AoE stun for the lashes when they spawn, just to keep them under control. Another thing that you should probably know actually, which is quite important, is that when you do actually kill Naturalist and you do transition into phase 2, all the modifications that apply will actually update in real time, apart from the Call of Night, which will be instantly removed when you transition. This means that if you had any spheres up from phase 1 as you were transitioning, they will also spawn lashes, so that's just something to keep in mind. The other ability that has changed in this phase is in fact the Call of Night. When you have the debuff in this phase, it will just periodically spawn a couple of toxic spores around yourself. This doesn't really change the strat too much, you still need to make sure that a player is stood on top of you so you're not doing pulsing AoE damage out on the entire raid. It's just those players need to be a little bit careful with all the toxic spores that you're spawning around yourself, as well as well, because they can slowly move towards you. Because so many more spores are up, it's even more important now that you make sure that your rogues, your hunters, your paladins, they all have their immunities on cooldown, and they're just soaking the spores as much as they possibly can, just to keep the room as free as possible so none of your positioning is limited. Nothing else is really all that different, so this phase is pretty easy as well, but you do need to make a decision on what boss you want to kill. Killing Arcanist is actually what a lot of guilds do on their first kill, as it leaves you with a phase that's relatively simple. But killing Solarist instead, although less popular, is still viable, and if you'd like to see exactly how that does work by killing Solarist, we'd recommend that you go watch the Serenity kill video. They have multiple points of views showing exactly how they deal with that phase, but as we killed Arcanist first, and that's how we've always done it, we're just going to go over that instead. Once the Arcanist has died, all 3 of Solarist's abilities are now modified. Now the Plasma Spheres no longer spawn the parasitic lashes, and instead just spawn a bunch of toxic spores when they explode. In this phase you don't want anyone to go out and immune these, you're going to need to use them when players get affected by the new Call of Night debuff. This new debuff, which is called Collapse of Night, is exactly the same as the previous one, except every 10 seconds those players will have a solar collapse spawn directly underneath them. Although it's more than possible for that player to leave the raid with someone standing on top of them to prevent the pulsing AoE damage on top of the raid, for them just to run about as a group and avoid the solar collapse for the full 40 seconds, it's not really ideal. It's very likely that one of them are going to get caught out and die, which could mean you're going to get a load of pulsing AoE damage out on the raid, or they might move too close and just spawn solar collapses on top of the raid and kill someone there instead. So what we do, as soon as these debuffs come out, we have players assigned to escort them out to the sides, they run into all the spores, they get as many stacks as they possibly can, and they just simply die. As soon as they have died, we res them up, or you can even have battle res totems down beforehand just so you save more reses, they get back to the raid, and the fight continues as normal. To make this strategy possible from the very start of the phase, it's a great idea to transition while orbs have just spawned, because as soon as you do enter this phase and the spheres change, they won't spawn the lashes, and instead you'll have the spores right from the get-go, so you will never run out of spores. You can always kill those players off. One thing to note though, just to make this strategy completely flawless, make sure that you assign people on either side of the boss to escort the players out, but make it so they have assigned backups as well. So if they get the debuff, someone can go and help them as well, rather than them running out on their own and just pulsing AoE damage all over the raid. And the last change in this phase is the Flare. This ability just deals a small burst of damage to the tank and anyone within 4 yards of him, but the bad thing about it is they will also apply the Parasitic Fetter to him. Because of this, you cannot stand next to the tank during this time, otherwise you're going to have multiple debuffs up at once, which can easily cause a wipe, as this Parasitic Fetter is actually empowered. When the Parasitic Fetter is dispelled, not only will 2 lashes spawn, but a controlled chaos will also spawn underneath that location. So it's really important that you don't randomly dispel it, and instead you dispel it at a certain time. Now, as this flare ability is applied to the tank almost immediately as soon as you enter the phase, it's really important that on the transition between 2 and 3, that you actually already have the boss in position, because you're going to be routed straight away. We tank the boss just between 2 orb locations, while making sure that, of course, that no one is stood on top of the tank. Now, the Parasitic Fetter debuff will actually do more and more damage over time, and once it does become unbearable, this is at the point where you want the other tank to taunt the boss to the other side of the room, and then the initial tank needs to be dispelled, while the ranged DPS just nuke down any lashes that spawn from the debuff. But you need to make sure that when you do decide to finally dispel it, you don't do it at the exact same time when orbs spawn, as the controlled chaos AoE that you've just created by dispelling, as well as the orbs exploding at the exact same time, can combo people and potentially wipe the raid. So the best time to traverse to the other side of the room is probably after a set of orbs. Once you finally get to the other side of the room and you've killed off all the lashes, you simply just repeat the fight out from there. You constantly want to keep sacrificing players that get the Collapse of Night debuff, whilst killing the orbs, and switching sides as soon as the orbs are dealt with, by dispelling the tank and having the entire raid move over. And in terms of strategy, that's all it is for this last phase. In terms of Bloodlust, you can pop it right at the very start of the phase, but it's probably not a great idea because the Collapse of Night players haven't died yet, so they could stay alive for a little bit longer, but it's probably not a great idea. Instead, it's probably better just to let them die, res them up, and then lust. And as this last phase is kind of a race like of how many battle reses and Ankh totems you have left versus the boss's HP, it's probably a good idea to try and transition into this phase with all your cooldowns up for this Bloodlust, so you can get a massive chunk of damage out on the boss before you have to start moving and dealing with mechanics. As for healing cooldowns, we just make sure that we have at least one cooldown up for every single set of orb explosions, but also one really strong one, so like Trank or Healing Tide or Sacrifice, after we've dispelled the tank and we're moving from the controlled chaos. But apart from that, there's not really that much else to go over.
Yeah, basically this strat just completely relies on just having as many battle reses and Ankh totems that you have.
As well as good damage.
Yeah, as well as good damage. And just keeping everything under control, making sure that you do follow the people out. Sometimes you can panic move thinking, oh, I've got to die really quickly. You do have 10 seconds before you actually do need to die. So make sure that you get an escort to go and just soak some orbs and you just collapse and then get someone to res you out there. But yeah, it's not too tough, and really after a couple of pulls, assuming that people don't die to the solo collapse all the time, you'll be fine.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help out, then please do drop us down a like. It helps us out a lot. If you'd like to see the written guide for this encounter, you can find that out on Wowhead. The link for that is in the description. And before we do go, we'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You guys have been awesome over the past few months. We appreciate the support so much, and we shall see you all in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.